Part 4. Subconscious habitual action. Another interesting and important phase of the manifestations of the subconscious is that concerned with the performance of more or less complex habitual physical actions. By far the greater portion of your ordinary physical movements are performed by your subconscious operating along the lines of habit, or acquired automatic action. All habit actions or acquired automatic actions are performed under the direction of the subconscious. Your first attempts at walking, writing, operating a typewriter, playing an instrument, running a sewing machine, or carrying on any similar operation involving repeated muscular movements, were accompanied by an intense consciousness of every detail of the required movements. As you became more proficient in the task, by reason of repeated practice and repetition, and as you acquired ease and dexterity in such performance, you gradually became less and less conscious of those details. Finally, you reached the stage in which you were able to perform the movements practically without conscious effort. But while your ordinary consciousness is no longer involved in the habitual acquired action, your subconscious is most decidedly involved in it. The performance has been merely transferred from your ordinary conscious mental mechanism to your extraordinary subconscious mental mechanism. Your mind is as much involved in the performance when the habit is acquired, as it was at the beginning, though you are not consciously aware of the fact. Your mind has not withdrawn from the task. It has merely transferred the performance from one field of its activities to another. It was formerly the fashion of philosophers to attempt to explain this well-known class of phenomena upon the theory that the acquired muscular movements became automatic, in the sense of purely mechanical. They held that the mind was no longer concerned with the muscular activities, and that the muscles had learned to perform the necessary actions involuntarily, automatically, and of themselves. But, they admitted, it could not be denied that the mind seemed to be always in the background, hovering around the task, as it were, and ready to resume its control should such necessity present itself. But certain thoughtful psychologists dissented from this crude theory, which, in fact, was no real theory at all but rather a confession of ignorance on the part of those advancing it. Lewis, an early authority, protested against the crude theory just mentioned. He said, "We are not conscious of the separate sensations which guide speech and writing. Are these processes mechanical? By no means. We know that they were laboriously learned by long tentative efforts, each of which was accompanied by distinct consciousness. To suppose that we pass from the psychical to the physical by frequent repetition, would lead to the monstrous conclusion that, when a naturalist has by laborious study become so familiarized with the specific marks of an animal or plant that he can recognize at a glance a particular species, or recognize by a single character the nature of the rest, the rapidity and certainty of this judgment proves it to be a mechanical, not a mental act." He continues, "The point never to be left out of sight is that actions which are known to be preceded and accompanied by sensations did not lose their special character of sentience because they are not preceded and accompanied by that peculiar state which is specially called a consciousness. When we see a man playing the piano, and at the same time talking of something far removed from the music, we say that his fingers move unconsciously, but we do not conclude that he is a musical machine. Muscular sensations and musical sensation regulate the movements of his fingers, and if he strikes a false note, or if one of the notes jangles, he is instantly aware of the fact that a particular group of sensations, such as musical tones, will set going a particular group of muscular movements without the intervention of any conscious effort is not more to be interpreted on purely mechanical principles than that a certain phrase will cause a storyteller to repeat a certain anecdote, or an old soldier to fight his battles or again. The later recognition that mind may function on planes or levels other than those of ordinary consciousness, the discovery of the plane or world of the subconscious, in short, put an end to these early controversies, and gave to even the most orthodox philosopher or psychologist an avenue of escape from his previous dilemma. At the present time, it is generally accepted that practically all of our habitual muscular movements, and this means by far the greater part of our entire muscular movements, are performed by the subconscious. Not only do you walk, speak, write, operate machines and play instruments in this way, but you also dress yourself, put on your shoes and your hat, adjust your spectacles, proceed to and from your daily work, wind your clock, lock your doors, put out your cat, and perform most of your customary little tasks of life in precisely this way, i.e., largely under the direction and control of your subconscious. How often have you been wrapped in a brown study, and have become practically unconscious of your surroundings, yet have walked home from your train, crossing crowded streets, dodging automobiles, escaping contact with other pedestrians, and finding yourself, at last, in front of your door with latchkey in hand? A little thought on the subject will reveal to you the startling fact that you perform the major portion of your habitual physical actions practically automatically, that is to say by means of your subconscious. Hearing these statements of facts for the first time, you may say, "Pooh, I simply remembered how to do these things, by repeated performance, and did not have to use my mind about them each time. That is all there is to it." But stop a moment, is this really all there is to it? You cannot remember just what particular shoe you put on first every morning. You cannot remember just which arm you place first in your coat every morning. You cannot remember every little motion, twist and turn you employ in tying your necktie each time you dress. But your subconscious remembers it perfectly and is thereby able to perform these tasks properly every day, without calling upon your conscious mentality for assistance. If you try on an old, and different, pair of shoes, long since laid aside, if you take up once more a style of necktie which you have not worn for years, you will find that your subconscious will remember every motion of tying the shoes or the necktie, though it would be impossible for your conscious mentality to describe the process in detail, or to remember the exact motions to be employed. Professor Joseph Jastrow, in one of his works, gives us several interesting personal experiences designed to illustrate the trouble experienced by the individual when his conscious mentality attempts to boss the job which long since has been taken over by the subconscious. The following will serve to illustrate the principle. He says, "I can readily adjust a certain kind of necktie which I wear only occasionally, if I do not put my attention upon it but let my hands follow their ingrained habits. If, however, I begin to reason which end goes over, and which under, and watch my movements in the mirror, a hopeless failure is the likely issue." The following verse furnishes a humorous illustration of the same principle. Here the centipede gets along quite well with its subconscious direction of its many legs, until the playful toad suggests that the many-legged one should direct his conscious mentality to boss the job. Then see what happens. The centipede was happy quite, until the toad, for fun, said, "A pray, which leg comes after which?" This wrought his mind to such a pitch, he lay distracted in the ditch considering how to run. Many persons quite proficient in the performance of delicate muscular movements find it almost impossible to teach others, by words, how the work is executed. It is only when they say, "It is like this," accompanying the words with the actual physical demonstration, that the desired instruction is imparted. The instructor in any branch of manual work, the dancing master, the teacher of skating, shooting, billiards, etc., can hope to teach his pupil to catch the movement only by imitation. He must lead his pupil to imitate the teacher's movements until he has made them his own, i.e., until his subconscious assimilates the movement and takes over its performance. It is an axiom of manual training that the pupil never really knows how to perform the manual task with proficiency until he is able to perform it along subconscious lines, although that term is not employed by the teachers and workmen. The pupil must continue to put his mind on it until he is able to have his subconscious take over the task. The skilled performance of a technical musical composition by a young woman who is conversing entertainingly with a young man who is turning the sheets of her music, and who possibly is also engaged at the same time in a roguish, i.e., a flirtation with the admiring youth, demonstrates forcibly the fact that the subconscious of the young woman is on the job so far as the musical performance is concerned. The subconscious of the experienced hostess, who is able to converse brilliantly with her guests at the dinner table, while missing nothing concerning the service being furnished them, and who at the same time is observing minutely the costumes of the visiting women, also is manifesting its efficiency. The same is true of the subconscious of the typist who is busily engaged in transcribing her notes, rapidly operating her machine, and yet at the same time is noting carefully the conversation of her fellow workers, or of her employer and his visitor. Examples of this kind are always at hand. You will note them now that your attention has been directed to the subject. You have but to recall the thoughts indulged in by you when you were shaving this morning. You do not remember the motions of your razor, because you were too busy thinking about something else even to note the physical movements at the time, but your subconscious was on the job. Nevertheless, in fact, it shaves you every morning. This action of your subconscious is the result of that law of your mental being which makes for efficiency and utility the instinctive urge toward obtaining the maximum of necessary muscular movement with the minimum expenditure of conscious attention. Were you compelled to exert the original degree of conscious attention in every repeated performance of a physical movement, you would not only fail to obtain proficiency, speed, ease and general efficiency of movement, but you would also experience the same degree of mental fatigue which marked the original performance of the task. Conscious attention requires a great outlay of nervous energy, and such expenditure is fatiguing. Proficiency and efficiency in any line of work depends largely upon the ability to pass the performance of the work on to the subconscious. This, however, only after the conscious faculties have thoroughly mastered the necessary experience concerning the details of the task. Kay states the rule as follows: the more we cultivate and train any power or faculty, the more easily and rapidly does it perform its work. The less that consciousness is concerned in it, the more work does it accomplish, and the less does it suffer from fatigue. Our mental progress, then, is in the direction of our becoming unconscious, or largely unconscious, of many of our activities. Abercrombie says, there is a remarkable law of the system by which actions at first requiring much attention are after frequent repetition performed with a much less degree of it, or without the mind being conscious of any effort. This is exemplified in various processes of daily occurrence, as reading or writing, but most remarkably in music. But here we must call your attention to an important point, and to indicate a source of danger. Just as a manager of a large establishment would be seriously handicapped were he to be deprived of his helpers and forced to perform all the details of the work himself, so, likewise, the work of the establishment would be seriously affected were the manager to fail to maintain a supervision over his subordinate workers. This is just as true in the case of the mind as in that of the establishment to which we have just referred. The subconscious is just as apt to pick up bad habits and methods as good ones, and it also easily tends to fall into bad habits of making shortcuts of doubtful value, or to adopt slouchy methods of operation. The conscious mentality, while not attempting to perform the detail work which is far better and more efficiently performed by the subconscious, should, nevertheless, always maintain a vigilant supervision of the results and output of the mental establishment. It should continue to examine the output and to pass upon the results, and if these be faulty or unsatisfactory, it should insist upon an improvement and a correction of the erroneous methods and processes. It should allow the subconscious to perform the detail work without meddlesome interference, but, at the same time, it should hold the subconscious responsible for the efficient performance of the tasks committed to its care. The work of educating the subconscious in this matter, or of correcting it when needed, is based upon certain quite well defined principles which we shall now present to you. These principles should be carefully considered by you, and their main points committed to memory, for they are very useful and necessary. Strange to say, while all persons continually employ the subconscious in their everyday work, very few are acquainted with the principles involved in the education and correction of its faculties and powers. Notwithstanding that these principles are very simple and are easily employed. The scientific method is far preferable to the Hita or Miss or Higgledy-Piggledy methods usually employed. Educating and directing the subconscious, I begin with concentrated attention. This rule is based upon the fact that the more the conscious attention is given to a new physical movement or operation at the start, and during the early stages of its acquirement, the more readily and more thoroughly does the subconscious acquire the knack of performing that movement or operation after it has been transmitted to it. The degree of conscious attention given to the task in the first place determines the degree of the impression made upon the subconscious, and the greater the degree of such impression, the more effective will be the subsequent performance of the task by the subconscious after it has taken over the matter. The same rule applies to the correction of the subconscious when it requires such by reason of faulty performance. The basic principles must be first thoroughly acquired by the conscious mentality, by means of concentrated attention. These are then transmitted to the subconscious, which thereafter acquires proficiency by repeated performance. The start must be a good one, if the finish is to be satisfactory. 2. Recognize the subconscious. By a strange and seldom recognized law of psychology, The actual recognition of the subconscious by the conscious mentality serves to establish a strong bond of mutual interest, coordination and cooperation between the two planes of the mind. This results in a far greater degree of receptivity by the subconscious, in the first place, and a far greater degree of efficiency on its part, in the second place. You will do well to enter into the spirit of this idea, even to the extent of thinking of the subconscious as being a real personal helper. You may address it, and treat it in general, as if it were indeed an independent, intelligent entity. It certainly is intelligent, though not really independent of your mental being. You may mentally address it, saying, "Here, subconscious. This is the way I want this thing done. This is the right way to do it. I am learning the hang of this thing, the knack of doing it efficiently, in the best possible way, in the least possible time, and with the least possible expenditure of energy. I want you to watch me closely so that you will acquire the knack of efficiency in doing it, so that you may do it still better when I turn it over to you." You may smile at this apparently fanciful idea, but it works out in actual practice. Treat the subconscious as a working partner and see how quickly, eagerly and effectively it will respond. 3. Don't meddle with the subconscious, but trust it. Following out the idea last stated, give the subconscious a chance to do its work. When you have turned a task over to it, examine its results, supervise its output, but don't meddle with its detail work. Do not bewilder it when it is performing the task. Remember the fate of the centipede in the verse previously quoted. The subconscious is somewhat sensitive, and at times suffers from stage fright if meddled with. Treat it kindly, and show confidence in it. Employ diplomacy in dealing with it. Use the iron hand if necessary, but do not forget the velvet glove on that hand. The subconscious has something like the artistic temperament of the opera singer. It must be handled properly in order to get the best results. It is an excellent player of golf, and a driver of automobiles, but you must show it that you trust it while it is playing or driving, and must not rattle it by meddlesome interference. Make a friend and a brother of your subconscious. You will never regret it.